You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
Welcome to Digging Up Ancient Aliens. This is the podcast where we examine alternative history and ancient alien narratives in popular media. Do these ideas hold water to an archaeologist, or are there better explanations out there? We are now on episode 78, and I am Frederick, your guide into the world of pseudo-archaeology. And this time, we will talk about ancient alien, but focus will be more on how the supporters and believers use human remains online to support their ideas. This is a bit of an extended version of the talk I presented at the Theoretical Archaeology Group meeting in Bournemouth this December of 2024. This was during a session on human remains in the online sphere in general. There was a lot of great talks, and I'm a bit sad that not more of them are available online. I want to thank all of you who support the show. You're really helping out producing this content, and I'm humbled and grateful for your support. And if you, dear listener, who getting this free podcast for free, want to help out, I will tell you how to do that and get some bonus stuff at the end of the episode. Remember that you can find sources, resources, and reading suggestions on our website, diggingupancientaliens.com. There you can also find contact info if you notice any mistakes or have any suggestions. And if you like the podcast, I would really appreciate it if you left one of those fancy 5-star reviews that I heard so much about. Now that we have finished our preparations, let's dig into the episode. Welcome, adventurers, to a unique podcast journey where the lines between the mystical and historical blur. Join us in the podcast and my travel where fantasy meets reality in the most unexpected of ways. Imagine a world where archaeologists aren't just digging through the earth, but through the layers of magic and mystery. Meet Ash and Tilly, your fearless guides, armed with nothing but their trusty trowels and a wealth of archaeological knowledge, theory, and experience. They are on a quest to explore uncharted territories where the wonders of the past intertwine with the fantastical. Each new episode takes you through thrilling new worlds, bringing with magic, mayhem, and mind-boggling discoveries. Have you ever wondered what to do if you find vampire teeth in a Bronze Age burial? Or ponder the possibility of sampling ectoplasm? And what about studying the remains of dragons? How would one even begin to approach such a task? Ash and Tilly don't just navigate these questions alone. They are joined by a cadre of specialist guests, adding depth and insight into every mystical discovery. Together, they are not just uncovering artifacts, they are unraveling the mysteries of a realm where archaeology and mythology collide. So if you're curious to find out if fantasy really is so far from reality, and if you're eager to delve into the untold stories where the past meets the paranormal, and my travel is your ticket to an extraordinary adventure. Subscribe now. Listen on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or at the archaeologicalpodcastnetwork.com. Unearth the secrets of the past and explore the realms where fantasy and archaeology intertwine. Join and my travel as they pave the way through the unknown, one episode at a time. With regard to these topics and its many sensitivities, where to start? Well, it's a good question. A question best pondered with a bitter taste of a recently discovered cup of cold coffee. As Jack Kerouac once wrote, but we lean forward to the next crazy venture beneath the sky. While the subject we're about to dive into may not be crazy, it certainly is unusual and crucial. Ethics, especially in archaeology and how it compares to the pseudo-historical use of human remains online. But before we get into the use of human remains in pseudo-historical places, we need to understand ancient aliens and the ideas and their ideas of history. For those who have been lucky enough to have been spared from the ancient alien theory, let me ruin that for you. The main gist of ancient alien theory, or ancient astronaut theory, or as Professor Ken Feder calls it, the horny spaceman theory, it is that human evolution, cultural development, and all of human history can only be understood if it was caused by a third party. In this case, it's E.T. who, instead of building a phone and going on a bike ride, instead creates humans and play a part in our development. All knowledge, architecture, and societal advancement are given to us by alien being with a vested interest in us. I'll get to why Professor Fader calls it a horny spaceman theory in just a moment. At this point, one might wonder where this idea originated from. And there's a couple, villains, maybe, to choose from. But a name that's often left out of this discussion is actually none less than Carl Sagan. In 1963, he published a paper suggesting that space-traveling aliens existed. In the end, he implied that the myth on Earth could be evidence of aliens visiting us. And if Erich von Däniken was aware of this paper when he published his book Chariots of the Gods in 1968, it's unfortunately unknown, but he is one of the main influences on the ancient alien, ancient astronaut theory. And we do know for a fact that he is building some of his ideas of the works of Louis Powell and Jacques Berger, who drew significantly from the work of H.P. Lovecraft and the esoteric movements that emerged after World War II. Erich von Däniken promoted the notion that an alien civilization visited Earth and played a role in the creation of humanity and the development of our history. All human technologies originates from an alien source given to our primitive ancestors, as he calls it. Another big name within the movement is Zecharia Sitchin, who is maybe most known for his theory that alien beings came to Earth to mine gold since, their atmosphere were out of it. Sitchin's evidence for this was Sumerian tablets, which he claimed to have been able to translate. There is, however, little evidence that Sitchin even could read cuneiform. Experts have pointed out that the translation often contradicts the dictionaries that was made by the actual scribes of Sumer, Acadia, and the following cultures. As so happens, the gold-digging aliens were either lazy or horny, or maybe both, and they started to experiment or mate with early hominids, creating humans as we are today. Through this, they could then get a slave workforce for their mining operation. And depending on the author, there was also a hierarchy between the perceived races. Von Däniken, for example, wrote in Chariots of the Gods, quote, "Was the black race a failure? And did the extraterrestrial change the genetic code by gene surgery and then program a white and yellow race?" Note the early use of "I'm just asking questions." While we could easily spend much more on ancient alien theory, and in fact, we have a whole back catalog of this show that has hours on it. But in summary, it builds on hyperdiffusion, anti-evolution, racism, and colonial ideas about our history. We will see these elements in how the ancient astronaut theories use these human remains online. Now, in September 2023, a journalist named Jaime Maussan presented what he claimed were 2 alien beings to the Mexican parliament. And in that hearing, Maussan claimed that these specimens had been tested by the National Autonomous University of Mexico, or UNAM, which were able to confirm that these were in fact ancient alien mummies. While it's correct that UNAM did test these specimens, it turns out they did a C14 analysis of the provided samples. And we all know that C14 samples don't really support that something... Well, it doesn't show the genetic structure of the sample. It can just provide the range of when it lived or died, basically. And, well, these tests does not support Maussan's claim that the university confirmed it to be alien form. Something that was left out of the original reporting is that Jaime Maussan has been involved in several hoaxes throughout the year, like the Metapec creature. And you can Google this. It will look odd at first, and it turned out to be just a shaved monkey. As we learned back in episode 38, the Montauk monster, identifying a creature that's supposed to have fur and no longer has it can be surprisingly challenging. If you don't believe me, pause the podcast for a moment and Google shaved bear. Now, would your first suggestion, if seeing that in the wild, be that that is definitely a bear? Probably not. Or you might be way better at zoology than I am, and I'm not an expert on that, so might not be that difficult. Let's move on. This was followed up by the demon fairy, which, according to Aya Romano, consists of several bat remains, sticks, and epoxy glue. And if you picture a demon fairy made out of bat remains and glue, you're probably quite close to what Maussan created. He has been doing some weird hobby crafting at home in his garage, for sure. In 2015, Maussan leveled up to using human remains for the first time, presenting a Peruvian mummy of a child as an alien being in a now private YouTube video from the Gaia channel. We haven't really covered much of the Gaia channel here, but maybe something we will look into in the future. The abuse of remains of children is not a one-time occurrence in this talk, unfortunately. We will also get to how these people get access to remains like this in a little bit. So, if the aliens were not cake nor extraterrestrial beings, what were they? According to Flavio Estrada, a forensic archaeologist who had the opportunity to study some of Maussan's mummies because he actually created several of them, they consist of human remains, animal bones, glue, and paper. X-rays taken on some of these specimens confirms this. We see a mixture of different sets of bones, we see a monkey cranial, and if we look closely at their hands, for example, we can see that phalanges are doubled and sometimes in the wrong direction. Bones in general are basically just floating around and can quite easily be identified by someone with a rudimentary understanding of the anatomy of a skeleton. Now, this is not a very sophisticated creation by someone with an expertise in anatomy. That's very, very clear. Still, Maussan has not been known for being a paragon of scientific rigor, or even a good hoaxer as seen in the previous examples. So, while the aliens seem to be some sort of crude paper mache art project at first glance, the reality is much darker. Now, Maussan got these remains from a smuggler who was operating in Peru and then mixed it together with the ingredients we mentioned previously. And the source is a man called Leonardo Riviera, who has admitted to smuggle at least 200 remains out of Peru. Unfortunately, smuggling is a quite lucrative business in Peru, and access to remains, mummies, and artifacts are quite easily. And while there are work being done to try to stop this smuggling and looting, it's unfortunately, still going on. And this is one of the reasons why you shouldn't buy artifacts online. You don't know who you're supporting, where they got their artifacts from, and you're contributing in a way to the destruction of our shared history and the history, in most cases, of indigenous people. And ancient alien people, unfortunately, rarely regard remains as something worthy of dignity. To them, they are objects or artifacts rather than beings. On one of Giorgio Tsoukalos' profile pictures for one of those sites where you can get a personalized video message, we see Tsoukalos posing with an elongated skull in his hand. Here we can plainly see that it's not an individual in the picture. It's a prop. Jeffrey Scarray talks about approaching remains in a way that gives them dignity and preserves their self-respect, their humanity, in a sense. And applying to the ideas of Kant, we can see how we can ethically approach remains while keeping this integrity intact. In the case of Tsoukalos posing with the remains, one can question if the integrity of the individual is actually preferred. I don't think he has thought of these things at any points. Another thing to consider is that ancient alien theorists don't even view these remains as human, as we will see. Some of these people claim that elongated skulls are not humans, but hybrids or even alien beings. So not only is this person in the picture stripped of their integrity, they're also stripped of their humanity. Fellow archaeology lovers, science nerd and history enthusiast, have you ever dreamt of showcasing your passion for our history and science? Dig no further. Welcome to the official merchandise store for your favorite podcast, Digging Up Ancient Aliens. Embark on a journey through time with our exclusive collection. Wrap yourself in the mysteries of the past with our range of themed shirts, mugs, and apparel. Each piece tells a story about your passions and podcast preference. And for the devoted archaeology aficionados, unveil our latest treasure, the Archaeology Mafia t-shirt. It is more than just apparel. It's a statement, a tribute to those who dig deeper, question the unknown, and unravel the secrets of our ancestors. These are not just merchandise. They are future relics from a time yet to be fully understood. Symbols of your dedication to unveiling the truth behind ancient aliens and the real wonders of our past. Join the crew of Digging Up Ancient Aliens, wear your curiosity, flaunt your knowledge, and join the Archaeology Mafia. Visit our store now and you will get an offer you can't refuse. Let's keep the spirit of exploration alive. Log on to diggingupancientaliens.com/store and grab your piece of history. Remember, the past is always present. Suppose that you go online to places where alternative history ideas are shared. Well, you can definitely count on getting a slight migraine, but you will also note that if there are posts showing human remains, the remains are most often from Peru, and this can be explained by the practice of artificial cranial deformation, or ACD, which we recently mentioned. And this is a practice that comes from the Paracas and Nazca people that over the centuries used artificial cranial deformation, especially in smaller children, to get these elongated craniums. And these craniums has been a staple in social media postings of pseudoscientists. And even if ACD can be found all over the globe, from, Europe to Africa to South America, it seems to be, according to these alternative history people, a mystery. But in reality, it's actually well understood, and it has been practiced until the 1900s. For example, in France, it was called the Toulouse deformity, and we have pictures of it that's very recent. On top of this, it can also be explained with the rampant smuggling in Peru at the moment. So these remains can be quite easily accessed and then photographed and shared, often in a setting that shows them to be non-human. And if you read the caption that usually accompanies these pictures of these elongated skulls, they often have claims that DNA tests show that these are not humans. These individuals are either 100% alien, they are not human, or maybe they are 50% alien, they're a mixture between an alien extraterrestrial being and a human. But it's hard to claim that this is little other than dehumanizing these remains. When something is not human, it's easier to not apply an ethical reflection regarding the remains. Not that we have seen such reflections among the pseudoscientific crowd so far. And the claim regarding the DNA often seen in these posts is the work of Brian Forrester and later also Jaime Maussan. Brian Forrester is a sculptor and a tour guide who has made a name for himself by promoting ancient aliens as part of South American and Egyptian history. And in 2014, he managed to take samples from remains that had those sent to an unspecified lab. The sampling can be seen on YouTube, and it's quite disturbing. In the video, we can see how people without adequate DNA sampling equipment destroy the mummy of a very young child. Dr. Jennifer Raff, Carl Fagan, Keith Fitzpatrick Matthews all point out that the result of the Forest 2014 samples were contaminated, as seen in the data, and the fact that, well, those taking the samples didn't wear the adequate equipment. And the remains that Forrester tested were obtained from a private museum called the Juan Navarro Hierro Paracas Museum. And we can see how they utilize these remains and ancient alien personas to market themselves in social media. The museum has previously allowed the TV show Ancient Alien to film parts of their episode at their facilities. And a similar story seemed to occur with Marsouli's test. Dr. Raff points out that while a proper lab was used in his test, the lab warned Marsouli that the sample showed signs of contaminations, something that did not hinder Marsoulis from claiming that the DNA was evidence of a giant/European hybrid creature that roamed South America and is proof of Atlantis or whatever that fancy your boat. This whole process, ranging from sampling without an ethical discussion to using bad samples as evidence, is highly unethical. And I think we all can agree on that. Spreading it online without proper sources reinforces the idea that the human remains displayed are not human, they are something different. And I want to continue a bit on Marsilius' claim here that these elongated skulls, their DNA is evidence of giants and a lost civilization. Because giants, they have their weird place in ancient alien lore and can sometimes refer to the fact that aliens were larger or they create giants in a lab. But if we go online, claims about giants found are among the oldest and most common ideas that we find online, except for the elongated skull. In some cases, like Derek Olson, also known as Stargate Voyager, they just take a picture and hope you won't Google it. Mr. Olson posted some time ago about giants with a picture of human remains. It was cropped in the hope that you would think it was a giant, and he discussed how there's evidence of giants as archaeologists have uncovered and then trying to hide or something like that. However, the image he used was stolen from a Mirror article discussing a find in the Astrakhan region of Russia. The people discussed in the article were of average human height and not giants in, well, any sense of the word. In other cases, we see old school Photoshop, or nowadays we see generative AI being used to promote this idea. I can't help it, but I love the old picture of giant skeleton excavated by people, and it looks so horribly bad photoshopped. It's almost so bad it becomes good in a sense. However, we should not forget that the remains are still individuals we see, and the images contribute to the otherization of group, often groups and people of color. And if you have spent any time online lately, as I mentioned, AI image has become a staple of the internet. And conspiracy theorists and alternative history promoters have, of course, seen value in these tools and use them to flood us with manipulated picture of a past that never was. Giants are a ubiquitous thing, of course, and without the need to know how to resize an image in paint, you can make as many bad AI rendering of giant human remains as you like. Giants are also alternative history legends, and they are among the oldest and have been hosts since the 1800s. An example is the San Diego giant that started appearing in papers around the turn of 1900s and can still be found in posts today, portrayed as real archaeological finds. These are just a few examples of how ancient alien pages and accounts use human remains online, and it's worth noting that they did not invent this story or approach. Ancient aliens did precisely what we see online, but for years in book form and then through the Ancient Alien TV series, and that one has been going for 18 seasons or more at this point. While they don't use human remains that often, luckily, displayed on the television, we do see the same ideas as we see online as in the telly show. For example, in the early shows, we follow an author named David Childress to a museum to see hidden giant remains. And in the clip, we see Childress lifting the remains of an indigenous person by, putting his eyes in the eye socket, and then goes on to describe the cranium as being part of another species. Again, demonstrate the act of dehumanization, the remains, and objectifying them. And we see similar tendencies when the show visits the Juan Navarro Hierro Paracas Museum, as we mentioned earlier. The ancient astronaut theory is clearly not based in science. While archaeology has started to deal with its colonial roots and discussing the ethics of research of human remains, the alternative history crowd has gone, the opposite way. They are continuing the colonial legacy and doubling down on things like hyperdiffusion. I'm not going to argue that archaeology as a field is perfect. A recent example is when samples were taken from cranium stored at the Kon-Tiki Museum against the Norwegian Ethic Board's recommendations. Now, raft enthusiast Thor Heyerdahl collected the remains on Rapa Nui between 1955 and 1956. As far as I can understand, these remains were collected with the approval of the Chilean government, but not with the approval of the local population of Rapa Nui. While it was not an uncommon practice back then, it's not how we should do things today. So when Norwegian professor Erik Thorsby applied to the Norwegian Ethic Boards in 2017, they asked him to obtain permission from the people at Rapa Nui before any samples could be taken. Unfortunately, Thorsby ignored the recommendation and proceeded to take the samples anyway. There will always be those who prioritize their needs or careers or, perceive the, route to fame over others. Of course, this is hard to prevent, but as a field, we can discuss this and how, for example, remains should be displayed both in museum and online, and how they should be sampled, what are the ethics, what are the guidelines, and we can create these guidelines and recommendations on how to use remains in press releases, online content, on archaeology, in sampling, in research. And we are interested in improving and dealing with complex questions as a discipline. On the other hand, the alternative history crowd is more interested in being perceived as doing science. Methodology and reflection are always in the back seat, if practiced at all. For them, the remains are objects that can be used to prove their story, something we can clearly see in their presence online. In the end, what we see online, the Mexican cake aliens, the assembling of mummies in Peru, the so-called giants conjured up from Photoshop or AI-generated images, and the elongated skulls miscast as half-alien hybrids is not simply eccentric entertainment or harmless speculations. These spectacles promoted by figures like Jaime Maussan or other authors who claim DNA evidence from mishandled samples reflect a deeper, more troubling pattern. They inherit a colonial legacy of hyperdiffusion and racism, causing non-European histories as primitive and dependent on mythical outsiders. They turn human remains into mere props, as if ancient ancestors were nothing more than puzzle pieces to be rearranged and glued together to support a preconceived narrative, one rooted in the belief that primitive people couldn't possibly have achieved the culture or technological feats without the meddling of horny spacemen. This misuse of ancestral human remains, often taken without ethical reflection and displayed without dignity, serves a larger purpose: to validate a fantasy denying human culture's complexity and autonomy. The pseudo-archaeological approach these fringe theorists take contrasts sharply with the self-examining field of archaeology, which continues to wrestle with ethical breaches, such as the mishandling of the Rapa Nui skulls at the Kon-Tiki Museum, and where archaeologists strive to acknowledge past wrongs and foster responsible, respectful curation. Alternative history proponents double down, producing content that dehumanizing the dead, disregard scientific standards, and resist accountability. By recognizing these patterns, by seeing how Erich von Däniken resists failures of human evolution, Zachariah Sitchin gold mining extraterrestrial, and David Childress casual handling of indigenous crania, all echo through today's AI-generated hocus. We can reject these exploitative fantasy. In doing so, we honor the lived experience of our ancestors, protect cultural heritage from further misuse, and ensure our understanding of the past is grounded not in spectacle, but in integrity, empathy, and rigorous inquiry. In short, when we choose to respect the dignity of ancient people and resist cheap shortcuts to alien explanations, we reaffirm our commitment to a history that belongs to all of humanity, truthful, accountable, and worthy of our collective memory. And on that note, we will leave the podcast for today. Please spread the word by leaving a positive review on platforms like iTunes, Spotify, or among your friends. Share an episode or two with them, especially your favorite episodes. For more information about me and the podcast, check out diggingupancientaliens.com. You'll find an extensive list of sources and resources and reading recommendations for those eager to expand their knowledge on this. And you also have proper academic sources for this one, since it was used in a conference. So you can see where exactly I got all of this from. If you want to support the show, head over to patreon.com/diggingupancientaliens. Or if you want another option that's not Patreon, you can sign up at the members portal at diggingupancientaliens.com/support. Signing up there will give you early episode, and they are of course ad-free. You also get bonus content and extended episodes. If you want to contact me, it can be done through most social media sites, and if you have comments, corrections, suggestions, or write that email in all caps, you find my contact info at the website. This show is created with the support of the Archaeology Podcast Network. You can find a lot of great shows like the CRM podcast and my travel on their website. Producer of the show is Ashley Array. I, Frederick Trussan, wrote, edited, and mastered the episode you're listening to. Sandra Martelor created the intro music, and our outro is by the band called Trallskruv, who sings their song Foliehatt, or Tinfoil Hat. Links to both of these artists can be found in the show notes. Until next time, keep shoveling that science.
Men jag skyddar mig